Thank you, Renee. Yeah, so it's supposed to be an interactive session. So I guess we shall explore this together. But before we start, I thought I'd give you a little bit of a background about the beginning of the Theosophical Society, sort of where it came from. The main founders of the Theosophical Society were Madame Blavatsky, who you can see behind me, Colonel Olcott, and William Q. Judge. So they were the three main founders of the society. In fact, it was Colonel Olcott and William Q. Judge who proposed the idea of forming a Theosophical Society. The Theosophical Society those people spearheaded the modern Theosophical Society. So Theosophy isn't new. There's been theosophical organisations throughout history. I'm not going to go into that, but it dates back to Neoplatonism and even before that. And there's many theosophical philosophers like Swedenborg, etc., who introduced Theosophy as part of their teachings at different times. So Theosophy is not something new. However, the Theosophical Society was established by these people to explore Theosophy in a modern context. And they introduced, or Madame Blavatsky herself introduced a lot of ideas as a sort of, what she called it as sort of lifting the veil to help begin people's exploration of what Theosophy might be. So all these three people, Blavatsky, Olcott and Judge, had a connection with Mahatmas, who we've talked about over yesterday really. So adepts are humans who have sort of taken the step or awoken to a higher degree than most of us. They're human beings. They're not disincarnate spirits. They're human beings. And through their awakening, they can consciously move their awareness into what we've been calling the insight level or the Buddhic level, and they can work from there. They often work from there when they need to. When they're not working from there, they're just like you and me, but when they're doing their work, they're working much at that level. That gives you sort of a bit of a background of the Mahatma letters. Colonel Olcott and William Q. Judge had communications with these adepts. There's some books written by Zealand, who was, I think, the fourth international president of the Theosophical Society, called, can you remember what they're called, Renee? There's two small books.
Letters from the Masters of the Buddhism, book 1 and book 2, I think it is.
Exactly right, Murray, thank you. That have copies of some of those letters in them. In fact, they've got a copy of the first letter written by a Mahatma to Colonel Olcott, which was written on sort of a very dark paper in a gold handwriting, which is very interesting. Blavatsky is a bit different because she lived with her teacher in Tibet. So Blavatsky spent pretty well all of her life from the age of about 19 or 20 travelling. And part of that travelling, she met her teacher in London, who was called Master Moria. They accidentally meeting. She had no idea this guy was coming to London. He came along with a delegation from India. And she happened to see the procession of these delegates coming, and there was this person that she'd only ever seen in her dreams. So she never really knew whether he was a real figure or not. Yeah. And suddenly there he was, and she just wanted to go up and run up to him and talk to him, but he stopped them and they met afterwards, and then their physical relationship came, and then eventually through her travels she went to Tibet and spent some time with him. As a woman, she had a bit of a challenge getting into Tibet, but she eventually managed to do it by dressing up as a man. So it tells you a little bit about life then. She left Tibet around about 1873 with the purpose of forming the Theosophical Society. She first tried to form the society in Egypt. I won't try and pronounce the name Juliet, but that failed. She couldn't get traction in Egypt for the Theosophical Society. So she left Egypt, and by way of, she went home to visit her relatives. She came from the Ukraine, so she went home, and then she went to New York. And in New York, she met Colonel Olcott. And then they started working very much together. Colonel Olcott at that time was investigating spiritual phenomena for the New York newspaper. So that's where they met, at the Eddy Farm, where they were both there exploring this spiritual phenomena. Eventually they got a flat together, which was called the Lamassery in New York. So they lived in the same place, and they had lots of groups of people coming to see them. And they formed what was known as the Magical Club, and exploring all different ideas, I guess. I don't know exactly what they did. And out of one of the talks there, Colonel Olcott and William Q. Judge proposed the idea of forming the Theosophical Society. So that's how the Theosophical Society came into being. So this was in September 1875, and the Theosophical Society was actually inaugurated in November 1875. So that gives you a sort of a bit of a background. So the whole story of the Mahatmas is an amazingly interesting story, but I'm not going to go into it here. But if you're interested in learning more about the Mahatmas, we've got a School of Theosophy in October, I think it is, early October. And over 5 days we explore the Mahatma letters with a focus on living the spiritual life. So if you're interested in learning more about that and the amazing advice they gave as part of their correspondence with a person called A.P. Sinnott, who was the editor of a newspaper in India at the time. Anyway, advertising's finished, to carry on. So the TS, from the perspective of the Mahatmas, who were very influential in whatever H.B. Blavatsky did, their focus on having her go out, and their instructions were create some sort of organisation to explore the unity of life and that sort of thing. So their idea was an experiment, the Theosophical Society. To see if the world was ready yet to look at exploring the ancient wisdom, the divine wisdom. So, and this sort of partly has played out through the two of the books that H.B. Blavatsky wrote. She wrote in the late 1870s a book called Isis Unveiled, which was her first real literary work, which really explored the myths and, yes.
Should you read that before you go on to the secret doctrine?
No, it's not necessary. Yeah. It's a slightly different vein in the secret doctrine to Isis Unveiled, but this is the first attempt to start getting people thinking about the myths of the world, what the world was about. So she explored lots of things in Isis Unveiled. And then later on, towards the end of her life, in 1888, she published The Secret Doctrine, which was a more concise and a book that went a little bit more in depth into, some of the subjects that theosophists have grown to learn and study. So she really was trying to lift the veil and give us an idea of some of the things to study. In her work, she never ever gave detailed esoteric knowledge, but she gave a hint of how to find that knowledge. Yes?
Yeah, I want to add to that. I did read a book that's in the library about the whole life of Blavatsky.
Okay, so there's a very good advertising for a book called The Extraordinary Life of Madame Blavatsky, written by Sylvia Cranston, who spent, she spent lots and lots of years researching and writing this book. When you read the literature chronologically, it's very interesting. Like there's Isis Unveiled, and then there was all these letters that travelled between A.P. Sinnott and the Mahatmas, and from that A.P. Sinnott wrote some books about, like for example, the chains and rounds that Alan talked about yesterday was introduced by the Mahatmas, but lots of other things as well. And A.P. Sinnott wrote 2 books, Esoteric Buddhism and the Occult the occult world. So those were the first book published about theosophy by anyone other than H.B. Blavatsky. And then later, the H.B. Blavatsky published The Secret Doctrine, which was a synthesis of the previous books, corrected and clarified, really. You've got to realize that these Mahatmas who were heavily involved in all the writings of these books, were not English speaking. They were Hindus, basically. And besides Kutumi, none of them spoke English. So they were trying to translate terms that there's no English equivalent for into English in these books. So this is why when you're reading the book, it's difficult sometimes to grasp what they're on about in a modern context. And I think today it's easier than it was 140 years ago or 130 years ago. So 130 years ago when these books were first introduced, it was very hard to read, but today it's a little bit easier because those terms and those ideas now are part of our mental atmosphere. So it's easier to pick up and understand. So as I was saying, their main emphasis was to see if the world was ready to explore these ideas yet. Because, to cut a long story short, the Mahatmas have always been present on the planet. In the Atlantean times, apparently they lived in the open, but then they realised they were going through the Kali Yuga, as Alan sort of introduced in his talk, which was considered the dark period, which is, and dark doesn't really mean evil, it means that we're going through a period where we'd lost connection with our spiritual nature. So we were much more focused than just the mind. So we'd lost that connection. So at that time, they chose to go into the background until such a time as humanity was willing to start opening up again. And so this was an experiment by these two Mahatmas to see if the world was open to these ideas yet. Their fellow Mahatmas thought they were crazy. They thought it was a stupid idea, that the world wasn't ready yet. But in the end, they said, okay, now let's try it and see. And they supported them. So to accomplish this, we really had to be open to exploring these ideas. We need to take a step ourselves. We need to move from a very selfish, judgmental, and personal nature to a much more deeper nature where we understand and really know that we're all part of this unified whole, that we're not really separate, and that as a human race, we're like a wave that's travelling through the universe or travelling through the planet. And no one in this wave or no personality can move forward without the whole lot going forward. So the Mahatmas very much believe in this concept, live this concept. In fact, if you look at Buddhism, in Buddhism they term this ideal where it's futile to look for personal liberalization without taking everyone along with you. And they call this the Bodhisattva ideal, or the Bodhisattva philosophy, where you reach a certain stage of awakening and then you have the choice of waiting for everyone to catch up with you or going back and helping everyone to catch up with you. So this is a very strong philosophy in Buddhism, in Mahayana Buddhism, not so much Theravada Buddhism, recognizing that you can't leave the wave, that you have to, if you choose to, you can choose to, but then you just have to wait for the wave to catch up with you before you can go further on. So that's putting it in a very simplistic terms. So from that, the first object was formed, to recognize this unity and to live this unity. So the Theosophical Society, the ideal that the Mahatmas had was that this would be a group of people who would be rooted in this ideal and understand this ideal that we are all part of one life wave. We're all part of this unified humanity, that we're not essentially separate beings. All right, so before you go to sleep, let's have a bit of a discussion now, because there's people here from all different levels and history of the Theosophical Society. Like I've been here around about 30 years, and I know people here that have been here longer than 30 years. So let's go through step by step. What was Blavatsky's view of the Theosophical Society? What did she view as the purpose of the Theosophical Society?
My opinion is that she wanted the West to realise that there was Eastern thought, to expand Western thought.
Yeah. So that's true. One of Blavatsky's motivations in the Theosophical Society, that's for sure, was to try and influence the West, which was becoming very materialistic. Yeah, and to introduce the concept of spirituality, which was rife in the East. If you go to India, the people there are born with an understanding that they have a spiritual nature, they are a spiritual being. So that was behind Blavatsky's, one of the things behind Blavatsky's motivations.
She was also the societies for truth seekers. That was a key thing from her.
Yeah.
But there was also a need at that time, because my understanding is that a lot of people, especially at higher levels, nobility, whatever, they had a search to spirituality more in the phenomena and all that stuff,
Yeah.
And she did that stuff as well, but it was not, she didn't emphasize on that.
No,
She used it as a beacon to get people in,
That's right. So she wasn't so much focused on phenomena, but it was a crux to get people looking at that there's something more than the physical. There's magical things. She performed phenomena in India. She performed quite a few phenomena, but that was the motivation was to get people to come and look deeper at what life's about. Mm.
John, it's interesting for people to know that the spiritualism and the spread of it through the United States was designed to alert people to life after death. Yeah. And it was one of those things where man and women as we are at the moment got all caught up in the phenomena and the entertainment of it.
Yeah.
But it still served a purpose, I think, didn't it?
It did. And spiritualism was quite different to spiritualism today. The spiritualism of those days was producing phenomena, like a hand would suddenly visualize, or a head would visualize and talk to you, or part of a body. So that phenomena was quite different.
The phenomena as well at that time had no philosophy and no underlying foundation behind it. So it was interesting that she got all the spiritualists on side fully at that time, and they had a lot of publications and things like that. But there came a point where she had to turn, because she was really bringing in the ethics of Theosophy. And so she did turn, and then she got their backs up completely. But a lot of people jumped over and could see what she was trying to do. So she was bringing in philosophy foundation for a lot of this, which was just purely all the manifestations that were happening at that time.
So what else was some of her motivations for starting the Theosophical Society?
Also encourage people for cremation
That's
rather
right.
than to be buried.
Yes, and the reason for that was that when people die, they often hang around their bodies, and if you cremate the body, there's nothing for them to hang around. So this is where some of the theory of cremation came from. Any other thoughts? So thank you.
Just that all religions are really all for the same cause, and that brotherhood is the major thing that will keep everyone on the path.
Yep. So it's interesting because the word religion means unite. Religions are supposed to unite people, and she spoke a lot about religion in the Secret Doctrine, mainly about the roots and the meaning of religion. But she was quite critical of religious organisations which had become dogmatic, and which excluded other people from their organisation. So she said things as she saw them, and sometimes this appears quite brutal. But when you think back and think about it, then you sort of get the picture. Yeah.
She was pretty tricky now and then. How she was, shall I say, working with other people and put the face and the nose right in their own religion. Because I remember once she was sailing, I think, from Egypt to India, and there was a second mate, and he was really religious, really Christian. And she told him a couple of things, and every time he wanted to jump off the ship or something, he couldn't win. You know what I mean?
Yeah, he was quite a persuasive person. Yeah. So anything else that anyone can think of was behind the impulse that Blavatsky had to start the society?
I think it's worthy of noting that this really was an amazing event because of what spiralled out from it. In those early years, the many intelligent seekers who were exposed to the Theosophical Society then went out worldwide and established their own movements, which are totally in sympathy with where they come from, with the basic theosophical thought.
Yep, that came later after Blavatsky's time. Yeah.
Just adding that to it, I think Blavatsky wanted to put the esoteric knowledge for the general public.
So the Theosophical Society was open to everybody.
Science became too much a religion at that time, and that's what they wanted to promote. It's not a religion. Yeah,
a lot of her writings, especially her collected writings, was her writings, her letters, and communications with about scientists, and once again she challenged the scientific dogmatic thinking, where in those days they made statements about this is what it is, while today it's much more this is the current theory. So science has gone a long way. So she was very critical of Darwin. Not so much disagreeing with Darwin's theory of evolution, but her view was that he'd missed a whole part of evolution, which was the spiritual evolution, which is what she tried to emphasize.
He changed his mind in the end, didn't he?
Yeah, I understand. Maybe we should talk about it more. Yeah, thank you, Diane. Yeah.
Just going back to purpose, you're saying, Madame Blavatsky, are you talking about the masters as well? Just the key purpose was they talk about the mental upliftment of humanity, but it's actually, I mean, that's how you put it then, the raising of consciousness of humanity on this planet was a key thing with the Theosophical Society. And when we study any of this purpose and any of this history, you can't study any of this without looking at the context of the time. The world was in a shocking state of narrow thought ruled by fear. And so when looking at any of this, you've got to go into the context of the day when studying history.
Okay, so my next question is, how did she see you could do that? How do you change the consciousness of the world?
I just wanted to add something to Maureen's, bringing that Eastern thought to the West. Eastern thoughts at that time were thought to be pagan and anti a lot of things. They were actually thought lower down, and they were trying to erase them from the planet. So it was a really huge thing to bring that Eastern thought.
Oh, well, Christianity was very successful at that. Yeah.
Something to add to it, because I did study that. In the late 1800s, what we call truth in schools, education-wise, etc., was actually the purest form. From late 1800s to 1900s, some entities hijacked the whole education system in America and etc., and they were influencing people to big events like First World War, whatever happened after that, you know. So, and that's where Madame Blavatsky also came in, and that's why the masters wanted to give the world that kind of truth. So it was out there, and people had to decide, because they can't decide for the people, you see. So the people could decide themselves, and that's what Madame Blavatsky, that's what I understand Madame Blavatsky, her big goal was as well.
Yeah, so I think one of her emphasis was to try and get people to think for themselves. To, you know, what is those terms she used? To become genuine thinkers.
A theosophist is one who has entered the path of
independent thought. Yeah. So that we would be the forefront of thinking and bringing through new ideas to the world.
I think the primary way of achieving that is the first objective there, the brotherhood, that support network.
That's right.
It's a difficult thing to do on your own in a world of closed-minded people, but it's so much easier when you've got a support network there.
Yeah, so you can see the main emphasis behind her forming society and her teachers was to create this network like that, where people could come and witness this connectedness that there was, this understanding of these universal principles that we talk about, these theories that we have worked out, you know, the laws of nature, so that we live them, we talk about them collectively, and we share them with the world.
It's not a path that you can follow and just get it right every time as well, and to be discouraged for searching because you've found the wrong answer is going to discourage people from continuing that search. So being able to voice the wrong, air quotes, the wrong opinion and it greeted with love is necessary, I think, to keeping seeking.
All throughout her writings, particularly the students, she emphasised, don't worry about failing. You only fail when you give up. Just get up and try again, and try again, and try again, and try again. Same in the first letter to Colonel Olcott from, I can't remember, from one of the Egyptian masters, and they said, you want to see us, keep trying.
And if we were all getting it right, none of us would need to be here.
The way that Colonel Olcott and Blavatsky survived was off Colonel Olcott's money. And they moved to India and they established the headquarters at Adyar. And then Colonel Olcott ran out of money, so they were broke. And that's when they implemented dues. So all the members who became members of the Theosophical Society paid dues to the Theosophical Society, so they paid a subscription, and part of that subscription went to Adyar, and Colonel Olcott was able to live because of those dues. And so there was a couple of members that criticised this, and that they shouldn't be doing that. And this is where this letter came out. Blavatsky responded to this very, strongly. But she never sent the letter, but it was found in the Adyar archives, and it was published by C. Generalasa. And he called it the original program of the Theosophical Society, which is just a little book. And she wrote there what her view of the Theosophical Society was. And her view extended to the idea that the whole reason of theosophers following theosophy was to live the principles that they're studying, to try and inculcate them fully into their lives. So she was much more focused on the idea of human regeneration, human transformation, which is part of that process if you do that. So she was very critical of people who judged each other or spoke out about each other. In fact, when the society was first started in New York, when anybody criticised someone personally, not what they said, but someone personally, they would get kicked out. You get expelled. So she was very strong on that whole aspect of the spiritual journey, the unique spiritual journey, and the transformative process we all have to go through, or we all do go through, as part of that spiritual journey.
She was known to be a pretty forthright, sock it to you, this is how it is, personality.
Yeah, that's certainly, she certainly didn't entertain fools lightly. So the other aspect of her view was the only way you can change the world is by changing yourself. So obviously she'd learned through her own experience that you can't go out and change other people. And I've certainly become convinced of that. You can't even really teach anybody else something. I've got a great Sufi story which emphasises this, which is what Alan was talking about yesterday. It was a story of fire. And I'm going to summarise it very quickly, but it was about this person who discovered how to make fire. And all he wanted to do was share it with everybody, so he travelled all around his area of the world and showed everybody how to make fire. He thought it was a great tool. And then years later, a teacher or a guru and his students wanted to go around and see what all these people had been doing with fire. So they travelled around the part of the world and to see what these people were doing. And the first village they got to, everyone was worshipping fire. No one was actually using it, they were just worshipping it. So one of the students got up and said, well, we should tell these people the truth, that you can use fire, and you can cook things on it and it can light you. And then that night those two students disappeared. They were never seen again. You know, this is an example, well I won't tell you, you can work it out yourself. They went to the next village and there they were worshipping statues of the person that brought them fire. You know, and once again, they tried to explain to the village that, you know, this is not the person, but it's the fire that's the important thing. But you know, they got accused of trying to change their beliefs and their religion and stuff, and so that was no good. So they went to the next village, and there they were worshipping the implements that made fire. And this is so on and so on. Each village most villages weren't using fire, but they were worshipping it, and they weren't interested in anybody telling them that their story was wrong. There's a different way to use fire. Of course, some villages were using fire. So in the end, you know, the journey was for the students to learn that, you know, it's futile to try and teach people something if they're not open to it. And that's one of the most impactful stories I've ever come from, of trying to change people, trying to teach people. You can't. You can only learn it yourself. So it's futile even standing up here and saying much, because at the end of the day, your own conditioning will determine what you take in, what you don't take in, all the time. Yeah. So that's why we talk so much about the importance of following your condition. And Blavatsky talks so much about the importance of continuing to explore. That's why she never, if you read The Secret Doctrine, there's some new information about there's some knowledge in there, but she doesn't go very deep. And she does that purposely because she knows that people won't learn by just reading about it. People have to discover it for themselves. So that's what the whole emphasis in the Theosophical Society is to discover these things for yourself. So that's Blavatsky's introduction. So I'll put up a slide, and so there are two important aspects. So one is the nurturing of the enlightened theosophical worker, and the second was the mainstreaming of theosophy through embedding concepts into the world. So this put in a more modern context of how theosophy is somewhat seen today. So one of the things is to encourage its members to explore what theosophy is, and then to embed some of these ideas into the world today. And we've been largely successful in some of that. Like the Theosophical Society introduced karma to the world, and now it's in all the dictionaries of the world. So some of our concepts that we've studied and introduced and explored to as deeply as we can are now part of mainstream thinking in the world. And this is part of what our goal is, but we sort of need to keep doing this in a sense. It's not saying that there weren't people in the West that knew all this stuff. There were, right throughout the centuries. But they were usually in small, well-hidden groups. Because don't forget, this was a very Christian time of the world where we burnt witches and wizards at the stake and things like that for being, for proving that there's something different than the concept that Christians believed at that time. So it was very difficult for many, many years to...
There's probably only a few people who had the means to travel and stay in places and be exposed to the culture and the religious beliefs, say in the Eastern countries, or Buddhism. I think at that time there were people that were being exposed to Buddhist thought, were coming back to the West, but there probably wasn't a big appetite for it yet.
Until the Dalai Lama left Tibet, the Western world knew very little about Buddhism. The main Buddhism was introduced by J.S.R. Mead and people like Suzuki at the time. And I guess, and Theravada Buddhism had almost died out, which was the Buddhism of India and Burma. And Colonel Olcott's the one that revived it. So Buddha, yeah. So even in the East, they were losing some of their rich heritage in Sri Lanka, yeah, and Burma. He also did it in Burma. Yeah, like Blavatsky in her Key to Theosophy suggests that Theosophy isn't about getting you to leave your religion, but it's getting you to explore it more deeply, so you understand it at a deeper level. So she wasn't knocking, where religion came from, but yeah. Or the dogmatism of the dogmatizing of it. So if I carry on, Sri Ram, he had a view on our purpose. Sri Ram was the 5th international president of the Theosophical Society, and he was a very mystical type leader. He was quite different to the previous leaders. After Blavatsky, there was Blavatsky, there was Annie Besant, who had a real emphasis on Theosophy being practical. So her focus was to try and make Theosophy practical, and she started lots of organisations around that, like the Theosophical Order of Service, which is very much about service in a practical way. And she started educational endeavours. The Theosophical Society during those years had lots of schools throughout India. When I travelled in India a couple of years ago, I came across the school which is Annie Besant School written all over it. It probably wasn't no longer part of the Theosophical Society, but it once was. And then in the Krishnamurthy years, in the early 20s and 30s, he started schools throughout India as well. And of course, so education was considered a major part of the theosophical work in the early days. Colonel Olcott also started schools, the original founder. So, children's education especially is important, giving them some sort of background into spirituality as part of their reality. But anyway, Sri Ram, he said the TS was founded with the exalted purpose of promoting the spiritual regeneration of man, man and woman, obviously. The first object of the TS, the universal brotherhood of humanity, insisted upon by the adepts as a necessary base for the promotion of its high aims, namely the radical transformation of humanity, its whole nature, mode of conduct, and future. So he very much thought that was the most important object of our organisation. And by living the principles behind that first object, we completely change. So that was his view. And then Radha Bernier, who was the president later on, she was our last international president. She was actually his daughter. And her view was that the Theosophical Society is concerned with the philosophy which probes into the nature of man and the universe in order to bring about change in man and society. So that's what she thought we were there to do, we're concerned about the philosophy which probes into the nature of ourselves. So it's looking inwardly into ourselves. The Society's work is concerned with the lifting the human spirit to its highest level. And the regeneration is the key to the work of the Society. It gives direction with regards to the nature of the work, clarifying what must be done and what programs are not compatible or useful. So she was very much focused on, this is our work as an organisation. And if we aren't doing this work in our branches, we're not compatible with the purpose of the organisation. What do you think of that? She was one of the longest serving presidents. She served for, I think, 30 years. 27, was it? Yeah, it was a long time. Yeah.
Her regeneration is very much in the individual, and she made an emphasis that if the individual doesn't change, nothing else is going to change. And I sometimes wonder, with the TS, we've done 142 years of talks and talks and talks, and if you go back to Madame Blavatsky, where she talks about the society in the future will have a lot more to do with psychology than the sciences, she makes very clear where the work is in the individual's mind. So we need to do that work ourselves, and then the rest will take care of itself. So I think she very much points to the individual. Both Radha Bernier and Madame Blavatsky's, all of her last works, all of her last 3 letters were saying, talking to the individual to change their mode of thought. It's quite clear.
So it's a transformative journey, essentially, is the way I put it.
I was talking to a guy in Theosophical in Sydney a couple of months ago. About 40 years ago, he was at an event and he found himself on a balcony alone with Sri Ram, and he said, "Can I ask you a question?" He said, "Sure." He said, "How, with all that's going on in the TS, and always is some sort of turmoil, there was, coups and all sorts of stuff happening in Adyar and dissensions as there usually is." And he said, "With all this going on, how are you staying so calm and unworried?" And he just looked at him and he said, It's all wind blowing in the trees." And I thought that was beautiful.
Did you ever meet Sri Ram, Diane?
He was just the most amazingly beautiful man. You could feel his aura. I mean, it was bigger than this room.
Yeah. I've heard the same, people have the same experience with Krishnamurthy. They'd go in to meet him with papers full of questions. They'd go and sit down in half an hour of silence, didn't even think to look at their paper, and he walked out, and the transformation they went through as part of that process was amazing. I've heard the same stories with Yogananda. People used to go in and come because they'd have to go for an interview if they want to become a member of the Self-Realization Fellowship, and they'd come in and they'd sit down for ages, and then he would decide eventually, but no communication. One guy explained it as though he was looking into them to see if it was their time to join the Self-Realization Fellowship, which is quite a particular approach to living the spiritual life. Yeah.
Probably people also experience that around the current Dalai Lama.
Yep. Yeah, certainly, great spiritual figures have this sense, and they uplift you when you're in their presence. So they take your consciousness or awareness out of your mind and lift it up into your higher nature, that Buddhic nature we were talking about. And that's where the communication happens, which is not communication of words or thoughts or ideas. It's direct perception of, I don't know. You have to experience it. So, given that is our purpose, it's the self-regeneration, the spiritual transformation, changing, to develop the creation of this unity, this knowing of this unity, then what would you consider as our work and our branches? Yeah, Alan.
I agree with Radha Bernier.
Yep.
But she was a very advanced human being, I think, and was a lot of what she said was way above me and became intellectual rather than actual.
Okay. Yeah. So it's as you said to me yesterday, the longest journey in the world is the journey from the head to the heart. Yeah. But it's only ourselves that can take that journey.
It's only been recently that they've started to understand that we actually have a large number of neurons in our heart. We have almost a second brain in our heart, and that they've also found that there is a frequency with which they communicate, and it's 0.1 hertz, which is very, very low frequency. And that there are organisations, you might want to Google HeartMath, and they've developed techniques for communicating with your heart, because it has such powerful wisdom, but it's not speaking to us in English. And we need to be able to hear it, don't we?
And as I said, Theosophical Society as one of these implements that brings us from the head to the heart.
Yeah. Was lost it, but it needs to find it.
Yeah.
So this is what this regeneration is about. Yeah. Which I think Radha knew. She never read anything. She always talked.
Just on that heart subject,
Oh, go on,
there
David.
is this most absolutely beautiful video called The Power of the Heart. We showed it at how many times? Three. People wanted to see it 3 times. It was so powerful. And the tears and the transformation in people was just phenomenal.
Sounds good. I have to have a look at that.
Just Alan's comment, the society, we need to go from the heart more, but we can only do that if individuals do that. It's individuals that need to do that, the rest will...
That's why, Rada says, it's about personal regeneration. The society will only change and the world will only change through individuals going through this process. And that affects everybody else as part of that process. Well, that's what I believe anyway. So any other thoughts? So the purpose of the Theosophical Society?
Yeah, I think that yes is actually a tool or path to go home.
Yeah, it's the journey home, isn't it? The journey of the prodigal son.
No shortcuts, are there?
Well, I don't know. I think there are a few.
No.
Tell me.
Eddie Besson uses the analogy of climbing a mountain, where most of humanity is going around the mountain slowly, around spirals, slowly up the mountain, over millions of years. You can go straight up the mountain, but it's slippery. Have you ever seen played the game Snakes and Ladders? Yeah. And that's what that analogy is from. Snakes and Ladders is an old Indian board game. It's about karma. If you've got some karma to resolve, you might find yourself going down the snake. Having to start again. You might have a bit of karma which helps you go up the ladder. So this is the whole story behind the story of the snakes and the ladders.
In that story from Annie Besant, when she talks about the mountain, she also talks about, like, on the path, there's a bush, and so we actually get waylaid, we're looking around the bush, and then we're looking at the butterflies and everything. But every now and again, someone turns their head upward and sees something a little bit bigger, and then they move on. It was the most beautiful story. It's about 8 pages at the beginning of it's the Ancient Wisdom. And sometimes we used to read it to new people when they first start, because you can't take your attention off this beautiful analogy she gives us of the path. It's really nice. Yeah.
I think there's an impediment to be very aware of when you start looking for the shortcut. Because if there's any element of your ego in there,
then you go down the snake.
Fail.
Yep, then the snake comes and boom, you get it. But you carry on up again and you get there.
Yeah, well, that's right.
I think we were onto something when we were talking about the heart as being a shortcut, because it already knows the path. We're quite often up here. If I may, it only takes a few seconds to share something from the Heart Math Foundation and getting that communication between the mind and the heart. It's very simple to do. It's simply closing the eyes, taking a deep breath, and putting your hand on your heart to bring your awareness to it. And then to start that communication, it's as simple as feeling thankful. There's a lot of other positive feelings you can use, but thankful is quite attainable because we all know how to feel thankful. And 10 seconds a day is all it takes, and you start to get that communication with your heart. And I think that would be an excellent shortcut.
Taking the time in today, and even just meditating with a focus in your heart.
Personally, I don't think there are shortcuts, because everybody has to do it his own way,
Yeah.
Everybody has to do it his own way, so what for you is shortcut is not for somebody else, so you have to define what a shortcut is.
Yeah, when I look at Krishnamurthy, in his life, he had a very interesting, very amazing life, but he had some powerful lessons in that life, and that turned him into what he became. He's a bit like the Buddha, except he sat under a pepper tree, and he had his transformative experience there, which changed his perception of reality all the time. And as you saw in that video, he's talking from a level of awareness that we can only dream of. In that sense. Yeah.
It's probably just, the word shortcut,
That's all right.
The word shortcut's just probably not the right word to use. It implies that you're going to avoid the pitfalls, and it's from the pitfalls that you learn and develop.
That's right. I've often taken shortcuts to places when travelling. They've always ended up being longer, so it's interesting. So Murray, you want to say something?
I'd like to speak for a potential shift of consciousness in Matthias in the world today, which is to not only hold the formation of the nucleus of humanity as important, but also think more network consciousness, because we are humanity, a great network of connections and relationships. But also there'd be other organisations in the world which are quite like the Theosophical Society in intent. So I think that is a very valuable expansion of consciousness to think, hey, we're a band of organisations going forward in the world in a network of life.
Yeah, it's a good thing. There's many like-minded organisations that are doing similar things to us.
Yeah, true.
Yeah. I've got a bit of a challenging slide here. So nurturing of the theosophical worker. I think this comes from Vic Hao Chin, who's quite an inspiration. So a branch or a member can be very active but not very helpful in theosophical work. So branches can become debating clubs dominated by a few vocal members. I travel a lot, and some branches tend to have meetings debating things rather than exploring things. And a branch subjects are without a long-term direction, take up fancies of some members. So you just hear what some members want to hear. So there's no direction. So ask yourself, does your branch have a focus and a direction? Even today, as being part of a charity, we're supposed to have an annual purpose every year of what we're trying to accomplish, which we're supposed to report back on to the charity services the next year. So from an exoteric level, we're even being told that we need to look much more with focus that we're trying to accomplish. So as part of our work in our branches, do we have an intention of what we're trying to do? Renee? Yeah.
If you look at it as a goal, we're really just trying to awaken the heart. That is the purpose.
If that is our underlying purpose, if you all agree with it, then that's the work that we do in our branches. All our programs have some sort of focus with that in mind, so that we start to help create that shift. But then it becomes much more practical, rather than just theoretical, because you can't do this in theory, you can only do it through the practice, opening the heart.
I think sometimes a challenge for a group like Theosophy, or a group that I'm president of, which is a psychotherapy group, is that my sense of the other group that I'm in is that people come along and it's like a library, and they want to take out a book, like a metaphysical book, so they want to take away a new process that they can use with their clients. So they're like a collection of individuals who may be doing good work in the world individually, but we don't have a group focus. But my perception is that we're a collection of individuals and we enjoy being together and talking about stuff we're interested in.
Which I would say is very similar to the Theosophical Society. Yeah.
And these people just love to learn one more thing.
I think the TS is in the same boat at the moment, largely. Yeah. So how do we move from, being largely intellectually focused to becoming heart focused and working together? Yeah. But in service, it does two things. It opens the heart, and it gets people working together. Just the last couple of points. Branch leaders may have, if a branch leader or someone that's leading something doesn't have a good understanding of the ageless wisdom, then it's very hard to lead in that process sometimes. So, it's about the learning process as well for the leaders of that group, which is good why we have things like this happening to try and engender some sort of background understanding in theosophy. So members may know a lot of theosophical information, but the life lived may not be in harmony with their beliefs. I can even recognise that in myself at times. Like I have all this understanding within me, but unless my life is living those ideals, then there's disharmony within me, and that creates disease. I become uneasy, and that can develop into genuine disease eventually, because you're not living the life that you believe is the right sort of life. So it's interesting ideas to explore, but overall, the question that I have is, You know, what do we do in our branches to create that purpose of, you know, human regeneration or spiritual regeneration or self-transformation of our members as part of that group? And do we all in our branches have a focus? And do our members know about that focus? So that our program, whatever it might be, practical or theoretical, moves us forward in that particular idea or particular focus.
I think that how we do that is specifically being sure that the theosophical thought, principles, guidelines towards this path of self-transformation, where you do the work, we need to be sure that that is very present in our branches and is not diluted by other stuff that's interesting and related, but not really focused. And I would just like to say, I think it's very important, we're looking at this, we do have to cater for people coming in at different levels. And the ideal is that they seek self-transformation, but if they don't, they're not excluded from taking their first steps within our organisation. And that is quite a challenge. Otherwise, we're making a judgment about why they're there. And some people are only there for the fringe stuff, but this is their first step. And we can allow them the opportunity to grow from that.
So once you've got your purpose in your branch, everything you do feeds into that purpose. So you're bringing in speakers to speak to your branch. It needs to help clarify that purpose. The speaker themselves mightn't clarify that purpose, but someone needs to bridge the gap when the speaker's speaking or after the speaker has spoken, so that you can show the members how and why that person's there.
When I spent some time with Sai Baba, and I just went for a visit, and he wasn't my guru, I just went for a visit. But the one thing I came back from there was the way he could speak. And in some of the discourses he gave, you came away recognising what you needed to sort of like work on, not because he told you directly, and it didn't feel hard. You laughed at yourself. You laughed at the little things that, were difficult and the things you did, and you laughed and you came back, and in the laughing, actually they sort of dropped off to a degree. So it doesn't have to be hard work, but what you did feel there was the love that resonated, and the love. When there's love, then you just want to give back and serve. You don't have to ask people.
His motto was, love all, serve all.
That's right,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay, thank you, Carol.